What's up, basketball fans? Welcome to the Rats Report. It's time to talk about the Raptors trade deadline preview, and I have a special guest with me. Introduce yourself, my guy.
Yo, what's up, everybody? It's JJ Buckets. It's been a while since I've been on the channel, so nice to see everybody again.
Absolutely. Good to do this. It's always fun talking about trade deadlines. Obviously, the Raptors have already made a couple of trades in Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby. There have been a few listed names potentially in Bruce Brown, Gary Trent Jr., Chris Boucher, Dennis as well, and perhaps even Jakob. Let's go through some of these list of players, and we're going to be going through teams and potential returns and what specific type of players you like in return. Let's start with the most hottest name out there that's very likely to get traded, and that is Bruce Brown. So, JJ, who do you think which team do you see targeting Bruce Brown? Because it says half the league. And what kind of return are you looking for? Are you looking for a young player or a center? What specific type of players and picks are you looking for?
Yeah, man, I talked about this not too long ago on my YouTube channel, and Bruce Brown, I think, is very obviously the biggest trade asset for the Raptors. Although, depending on whether or not Yak is available, I guess we've seen the reports that obviously the Raptors, outside of, you know, I think BBQ is their nickname outside of Barnes, Barrett, and Quickly. Everybody is reportedly available.
Mhm.
So I digress a little bit, but yes, Brown is probably the biggest name that's going to be out there that's still wearing a Raptors jersey right now. And I look at the Knicks again, and look, I know we've already traded with them this season, but I look at the Knicks, I look at the Quentin Grimes situation, and I can't see a more seamless trade to put together. Now, I talked about this again briefly on my channel as well, and I guess I remember seeing somebody in the comments asking, "What do you like about Grimes?" Because I guess I didn't say it in the videos, but yeah, like fantastic 3-and-D player would fit like tremendously beside Scotty Barnes. Like that's the mold of player that I think you want around a guy like Barnes. And I think Grimes can do all the little things, space in the floor, play deep, like good enough defense. And you can obviously put together a package pretty seamlessly there. Like Evan Fournier's contract really takes care of all the salary failure. You can probably get Grimes. Maybe you get like some kind of draft compensation as well. Although at that point, if you're getting Grimes, I don't think you're really getting much draft compensation. So I think that's kind of what I'd be looking at there is just Fournier for the cap filler, and Quentin Grimes is kind of like the selling piece of that trade because Knicks are trying to get rid of him. He's a good young player, good fit beside Scotty. That's an easy one for me.
Yeah, no, I've actually gone through I was doing my own mock trades and I was looking at a lot of teams you're not like a lot of teams don't have that type of prospect that they're going to give up for a Bruce Brown. Like, like example, a lot of fans keep talking about Derek Lively. They weren't even going to give him up for a Pascal Siakam trade. So realistically, you're not going to get that. New York is one of the more realistic teams. I'm looking at someone like Dallas. Now, I know this may not make a lot of sense because they have Tim Hardaway there, but I think Bruce Brown could complement Kyrie and Luka's game so well. And again, it may be a little bit unrealistic. You can maybe do a Josh Green and a salary filler. I don't think you'll get a first round pick. And I believe they only have one first round pick they can trade it realistically anyway. So maybe if you get a Josh Green type of player, he's listed at about 6'5". He could play the small or backup small forward or whatever you want to insert him into a starting lineup, depending on who they draft and what they do in the future. But he's one of those players I've been looking at for quite some time. He's really, really good. He can get his own. He's a pretty decent defender from what I've seen. And he's still young enough. Again, he's not young to the point where he's 21. He's only been in the NBA for half a season or 1 year. He's been in the NBA for a few seasons now. And if the Raptors are able to get someone like that, that would be a great, great add to the Scotty Barnes and the Raptors, young BBQ, like you said. So let's move on to our next player here. This is a very, I've talked about this in my last video, but it's a very strange situation with Gary Trent, right? Because we see him as a player that could have been part of our future. He's obviously not had the season that a lot of us were hoping for, but also you've got to remember that he's a clutch client. They always demand good money, and there's always a chance he can leave as well. What are we doing with him? Are we keeping him in hopes of signing him for a cheaper deal? Is there a flight risk there where a team like the Detroit Pistons potentially offers a ton of money and he leaves us in free agency? Or do we sign him or do we treat him on the low and maybe get a second round pick? Like what is going on with Gary and what do we do with him?
I said this again, like I said this on my channel, but I think if the price, and you've pretty much touched upon it already yourself, like I think if the price is right, you in terms of the next contract that Gary Trent Jr. is seeking, you keep him. I like his mold of player. I know he hasn't had like the best season this year, but he's young enough and moving forward, he can definitely have a good spot on this team. I don't see any issues with keeping him as long as the salary that he's going to be demanding on that new contract is realistic and he doesn't hit you with well, actually, that's a good question. Let me toss this back to you, Warge. What do you think is a reasonable price for Gary Trent Jr. Um, in terms of an annual contract? Like, what do you see him signing for? Or what would you ideally want him to sign for?
Right now, I think like the way he's performing with respect to Gary, I think it might be even an overpay, but you have to be truthful and realistic about what would benefit both parties. I think somewhere around the 16 to 18 million range is probably reasonable for both sides. Of course, some people have gone as far as to say doesn't deserve more than 15 million. You also have to take into consideration again, a lot of teams out there want a young shooter, and there's going to be a market for him. Whether he struggled or not, doesn't matter how he's performed, there's still going to be teams that could potentially sign him and they may be willing to pay him up to 19, 20, 21 million dollars. So I think if the Raptors can maybe sign him a little bit less, maybe include a player option in there for, a 1+1 or, 2+1 kind of deal, kind of how they've done with their previous contract with Gary Trent. I think that would be a reasonable deal for both sides. It works out. We do know that TV deal is kicking in, so the salaries are going to be going up a ton. So maybe, you look at that and say you've got 2 years to work under this new contract. You do have a player option as well. If you decide to decline it, you want a bigger contract, and it also benefits both sides. So I think that's probably the most realistic contract extension for Gary.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, I think if you're clocking him around like 15, 16 million, like that's not a terrible price. Otherwise, yeah, like you could flip him to any of these teams that are obviously trying to win this season, and Gary Trent Jr. like fits right in there with most of them. I think the two that stick out to me most is probably the Mavericks or the Lakers. I think Gary
Mhm,
goes over there and is a seamless add to
mhm,
either one of those teams. Who would I necessarily want back from either of those teams? You've already mentioned Josh Green. I think Josh Green, realistically, outside of Lively, who they're not going to trade,
mhm,
Josh Green is probably the most alluring asset they have in any kind of trade talks for the Mavericks and for the Lakers. In terms of the contracts matching up, like Rui Hachimura is there. I like Rui Hachimura. I've seen him get like a little bit of flack from like Raptors fans in terms of, some like just they're not giving kudos to Rui. And
mhm.
here's the thing, like, do I think Rui is a fantastic player? Like, he maybe he's not the best player in the world, but I do sympathize for him in the sense that I think in LA, his minutes are so inconsistent sometimes that it's hard for him to necessarily develop, say, into a consistent good defender or a consistent knockdown shooter or stuff like that. Because some nights he's getting like 15, 16 minutes a game. Other nights he's getting like 32. And obviously, that's just the way of the NBA sometimes. But when it comes to a young player and their development, like that's gonna hurt them. So getting him over to a situation like Toronto where he can get more consistent minutes, I don't mind that. I really don't mind a Rui return on a trade.
Now, the only thing about Rui, I know we shouldn't judge games based off of statistics because there's so many factors, like you said. The only issue with him is he's listed at what, 6'8", 6'9". He doesn't
Mm,
rebound well for his size, and the team like the Raptors do need rebounding, especially with Pascal now gone. Especially even though OG wasn't a huge rebounder, he's so good at boxing out and defending the defensive rebounds anyway. So I think if Rui were to be on the Raptors, he's averaging something like 4 rebounds a game. Even with going back to the Wizards, I think it was 5 rebounds is the highest he's averaged in a season. So again, I ideally, and he doesn't shoot the 3-point ball exceptionally well. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, he's had one season. He's had
he's
one season. I'm going to quickly look this up. He's had one season where he's averaged great from the 3-point line, but other than that, it
He's
seems.
he's more of a mid-range shooter when it comes to his arsenal, but I do think the potential is there to extend his game a little bit like further in terms of shooting from the arc. Again, I think it's about consistency, I think it's about play time, and I think it's about opportunity in a lot of cases. And while his opportunity with the Lakers is like he's definitely a part of the rotation, I think he could get better opportunity elsewhere where he can turn into a better player than he's shown to date.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, he does, like, looking at his stats, there's kind of ironic I said that, but he's shooting 37% from the 3-point line, only on 2.9 attempts per game. I actually did watch him a lot with the Lakers during that playoff run when they lost to the Nuggets in the conference finals, I believe it was last year.
Mhm. Yeah.
He looked really well. Like he played exceptionally well. He looked great, and I was kind of surprised he's not really getting the opportunity this season again. LeBron's there, AD's there, whatever. They play the power forward center position wherever, but Rui, yeah, he could be intriguing. The only thing I quickly want to mention about Rui is his contract. I believe he has a he has a massive contract where he's making like 18. It's not massive, but I mean, it's kind of along the lines of what you're going to pay Gary Trent. He's
Mhm.
making something like, I believe, $17 million, $18 million. Quickly taking a look here. Yeah, he's making 15, 17, and 18 the following season. So I guess it's not too bad. I just expect maybe a little bit more because I feel like if you're trading Gary Trent, not that you ever want to get a specialist in a certain position, but it's not like he's not a great rebounder. He's a decent scorer, but he's not a great scorer. He's not a great 3-point shooter. He's not, it's one of those things. If you were able to do two of those things really well, it makes the trade obviously that much more attractive. But yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with Gary. Let's talk about another player now. This is a very, very interesting one because do we keep Jakob Poeltl or do we trade him now?
I think you've invested way too much into Yak to give him up, especially considering how bad the team has looked with him, not there at the center position. I think Jakob does a lot for you defensively, and while I think he maybe was billed as a little bit better of a defender than he actually was before showing up into Toronto, and some fans were disappointed about that. Realistically, I do think he anchors the defense a healthy amount. That is like as soon as he's out of the lineup, it shows. Like the Raptors were kind of already not great defensively, and then as soon as Yak is gone, now and obviously like OG's been gone as well, and I'm sure that has an impact on it. But like I don't think you can afford to give up Jakob Poeltl's presence down low as a defender and as a rebounder. As you're saying, the Raptors have been struggling with rebounding in particular, like whether it be Jate or whether it be Thad Young. Like it's just anybody else at that spot hasn't been that good. And like naturally you can look to acquire other names for next season, stuff like that. Now, like this Raptor season is over. Like we're looking towards the draft, right? Like even if they stumble into a play-in spot or something, which I hope they don't, like there's nothing going on this season. We're building towards the future. And I do think Yak is a building block that you want to keep around for the most part. Again, he's a great defensive anchor. He's a good rebounder, and he can be a tremendous pick and roll partner for quickly for a very long time. Yak is a very good pick and roll big, and I really enjoy watching him in that role. So I'd like to personally keep Yak, although depending on how high the Raptors get in the draft, somebody like Alexander Sarr could be an interesting addition to the team as well. But that's looking well ahead into the future. As far as this deadline goes, I would be surprised if Jakob Poeltl isn't still in Raptors jersey after it.
So if a team came up to the Raptors and let's say they offered two first round picks, one in 2025, one in 2026, top 10 protected, do you take that deal or not? And a salary filler, of course.
Oh, why you got to make it difficult for me like that, man? Uh, it depends on who's the teams that are offering. It depends on the picks, right? Because hey man, two first round picks is two first round picks. Obviously, you gave up one first rounder to go get Yak, and obviously that one's kind of bit you in the ass. And in terms of just the control that it gives the Spurs over the Raptors' future in that pick.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think it depends on picks. I think it depends on the picks. But it's something worth considering in that situation. I don't disagree with you.
hmm Yeah, I agree. The thing is, Jakob is so important to this team, and considering they've really suffered not only on the defensive side, also their rebounding hasn't been great since he's been out. I think for the time being, and like you said, we don't really have a player that is ready to come in and take over Jakob's position at the time being. So it's gonna be a recipe for disaster unless the Raptors want to bottom out for the next, year or so for the bottom three teams and maybe tank for Cooper Flag, but then maybe you could view it as that way. But again, I don't think the Raptors should be in any hurry to trade Jakob. They don't have a backup center. I think Jonte is more of a power forward for me. I felt like that for quite some time. Obviously, the Raptors don't have much options, so they're playing him at the center position, but they don't have anyone that can come in. Unfortunate for really, really unfortunate for Christian Koloko. We saw what happened with him. We don't know if he's going to play basketball again, but yeah, the Raptors don't really have an option at the center position. I think it'd be wise to keep Jakob for now. And I think as we progress in the next year or so, like I mentioned this in my last video, JJ, when you look at a lot of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, even you look at the 76ers, obviously they got Embiid. You got the Boston Celtics, they got Porzingis and Horford. You look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, they got Jared Allen. All of these top teams have a good center. So you're going to definitely have a team that's going to be desperate enough to want a player like Jakob to guard some of these players and just be a good rim protector and provide some defense for them. So I think for the timing, you've got to keep them. It wouldn't really make a ton of sense unless they get an offer that blows them away, which I really don't see happening. But we'll see what happens in terms of some of the other guys. Who are some of the other players that you think could potentially get traded? We've obviously heard some rumors as well. Who do you see being on the Raptors and maybe, being on the Raptors or not being on the Raptors in the next few weeks or so, in the next 10 days or so?
Yeah, I've talked about it before, but according to Blake Murphy on Twitter, or at least somebody quoted something that I believe he said on one of his shows on Twitter, that Chris Boucher is in all likelihood gone before the deadline. And I fully understand that. Like Boucher is a piece that can, be a very good role player for a winning team. And the Raptors are not a winning team. So I wouldn't be surprised if they take whatever decent young player or like salary filler and a couple of like second round picks or something for him and flip him elsewhere. And quite frankly, I think Boucher deserves to get an opportunity to go, to a winning team and try to, well, win. I think he's been a very good role player for the Raptors for a long time, and I just kind of think he's at the end of his tenure with the Raptors.
I'm actually one of the few that I think the Raptors may end up keeping Chris Boucher. It's not because no disrespect to Chris Boucher, but I just don't think they're going to get a decent offer for him. Not even a good offer. I think there's very few teams that actually would want Chris Boucher. I think the Celtics want him, but they don't have the money to make it work. I could see a team like the Dallas Mavericks wanting him as well, but again, you're not going to get a ton back from them. So I think the Raptors end up keeping him, and maybe that expiring contract next season looks a lot more attractive. To get off a salary. Maybe take on a salary in return for Chris Boucher and maybe get a second round pick. I think that could be realistic next season. I'd be surprised if the Raptors do get any sort of trade done. But what about some of the other players? Do you see any sort of deals being out there for someone like Otto Porter, Thaddeus Young? I feel like we're missing someone here. Even Dennis, who we haven't touched upon.
Right. Dennis Smith is a big one that we haven't talked about. But before we get to him, in terms of Porter, I mean, maybe somebody takes a flyer on him. He hasn't really done much with the Raptors. And it's weird because like there's times where like the Raptors will play him in the rotation and then Porter looks good and then we don't see him for like what, 10 games?
Load
Um
management, load management.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, maybe somebody will take a flyer on him. As far as Thad Young, like could some team out there take a look at that young and be like he can and think to themselves that he could situationally be a good player in the rotation for their winning team? Sure, but at the same time, I like that young. I think anytime that you watch him in the post game interviews or anytime you listen to Thad Young talk, he's the kind of veteran leader you want around your young team. So I'm not saying that makes him untouchable or anything on this roster by any means, but I don't think
Mhm.
they're jumping at the opportunity to trade Thad Young. Again, he says all the right things. I'm not around to see it, but I'm sure behind closed doors, he's a good motivator. He's a just good, like I said, he's a good veteran presence for these young guys. So I don't think that's one that you're rushing to get out the door. As far as Schroeder goes, I think he's been a good piece for the bench, but as I kind of touched upon in my last video, if you get a good offer and you have an opportunity to clear up minutes, take a look at some of these young guys, with like a Kira Lewis Jr. or with I'm blanking on his name. I always forget.
Javon
Yes,
Freeman
Javon.
Liberty.
Yeah, I see in my head, I always mix up if it's Liberty Freeman or Freeman Liberty. Yes. I think if you have a chance to kind of give them a good run in the second half of the season and see whether or not they can be good NBA pros for you, I think you do it. And in that sense, I think you can happily move off Dennis Schroeder, probably get a little bit of pick capital for him and take whatever hopefully expiring contract in his place. Because Dennis has a very tradable contract, right? Like
Hmm.
that's not one that's going to be tough to get rid of. So
No.
I think it's worth looking into a Dennis Smith Jr. trade. As far as the other guys, sorry, I said Dennis Smith Jr. I don't know where that one came from. Dennis Schroeder
We have too
trade.
many juniors on our team. That's why.
Honestly, shout out Dennis Smith Jr. Man, met him one time in LA. Very
Oh yeah.
nice guy. Always kind of wish that his NBA career turned out better than it actually did, but
Yeah.
that's a story for another day.
So yeah, Dennis, I could definitely see there being a huge market for him again. Like the Lakers, I think a team even potentially like the Nuggets could really use him as an insurance if something happens to Jamal Murray. He's had injuries. They do have Reggie Jackson there. I know they like him there, but maybe if we get Reggie Jackson, maybe some sort of salary or one of the younger players. They do have some no, I wouldn't say like really good prospects, but they have some prospects that I could see the Raptors being intrigued by. But we'll see what happens. With Dennis, I think it's kind of hard to predict which team's gonna really want Dennis out there because there's so much unpredictability around the NBA around certain guys and if they're actually going to get moved. So we'll see what happens. But JJ, any last words? Any one player if the Raptors could acquire realistic player if the Raptors could acquire that you'd want on the Raptors team before we end this video?
Yeah, so there's this little known big from Serbia out there called Nikola Jokic. I think he'd be a great fit on this team.
Realistic.
All right. There's this other Slavic player that I would really love on this team as well. His name's Luka Doncic. He's not really that good. He just dropped 70 for the first time in his career. It took him long enough. In all seriousness, though, I will throw a name at you that I actually do really like. I just don't necessarily know how this deal would come together in theory. I like somebody like a Wendell Carter Jr. from the Magic.
Mhm.
If they could make that deal work in whatever capacity, I think Wendell would be a fun player for a team that I think believe they would have more center depth than they ended up with. And you were talking about it, obviously, with Koloko and with his respiratory issue, I believe it was, where unfortunately that kind of look, we haven't heard much about it, but it looks like
Yeah.
it's kind of threatening his career. I think the Raptors expected to have more depth at the center spot than they did, than they
Yeah.
ended up having, excuse me.
Yeah.
But obviously with the Koloko stuff, unfortunately, and I hope he's doing all right, by the way. Let me just toss that out there. But
Yeah.
yeah, like with Koloko facing the health issues that he's facing, I think, yeah, depth at the big man spot is something that you're looking for. And I think Wendell would honestly fit pretty seamlessly here, and I think it would work out. As far as who the Magic would want back, I don't know. I've heard Magic fans talk about guard play, which is hilarious to me because I've always thought about, the Magic having a buttload of guards, but I guess not that many of them are that good. So, hey, if
Mhm.
they want a Dennis, if they want a Bruce Brown, and they're willing to send Wendell back here, sure, let's do it.
Yeah, no, I really like Wendell Carter Jr. too. I believe it's Wendell Carter Jr. We're talking about so many juniors, but Wendell Carter would be great for the Raptors. He can space the floor as well, which is a huge bonus for any center that's able to do that. So I think if the Raptors are somehow, again, he's on a really reasonable contract. So if you could maybe flip someone like a Gary because he fits in with their timeline, and maybe again, I don't know how much the asking price is going to be, but maybe a second round pick or someone else in there as well. Maybe you do that deal. For me personally, I really have kept an eye on the Dallas Mavericks. Some of the younger guys for quite some time. I've mentioned Josh Green. I really like him if the Raptors are able to get him. But some of the other ones as well. Jaden Hardy could be intriguing, but I mean, for him, I feel like it might be an attitude thing. And remember, if you recall, he was projected to go, I believe, in the lottery. He ended up falling, I believe, at the end of the first round or early second round to the
Yeah,
Mavericks. So
there was a time where Jaden Hardy, like obviously this is like long before like the full draft season kicked
yeah,
off, but there was a time where Jaden Hardy was like a top five protected pick in that draft. Sorry,
yeah,
top five protected, top five projected pick in that draft.
yeah.
And then obviously that never really ended up materializing into anything. But I get what you're saying, I guess, in terms of the attitude thing and such. Like the talent is very obviously there. I don't think
Yeah.
that's a question.
Yeah, no, I really like Jaden Hardy, obviously Josh Green, but I think the realistic, if the Raptors are somehow able to get Omax, and I know I'm going to butcher his name here, but Oliver Maxence Prosper is, I guess, his name. But if the Raptors can somehow get him, he was having comparisons. I'm going to quickly pull up his stats here for those who aren't really familiar. He's only 21 years old. He's Canadian. He's 6'8", at 230 pounds, and he's power forward position. Now he hasn't obviously, been great with the Dallas Mavericks. 3 points, 2 rebounds, less than assist per game. So again, I know its numbers don't look good. He's very raw. So again, I do want to mention that he is very raw, but Omax is a player that I'd love to have on the Raptors. And if we can, again, not saying the Mavericks will give him up. If we can, that would be an interesting prospect to invest into for the future.
And for my French Canadians out there, it's Olivier.
Olivia, there. Well, I'm a disgrace to the French Canadians because I used to live in Montreal, but I forgot my French as soon as I started learning English. So apologies to the French Canadians out there. But yeah, Omax. I'm just gonna stick with Omax. Omax would be awesome if the Raptors can get him. But yeah, any last words before we depart here, JJ?
Yeah. Whenever Luka Doncic is unhappy in Dallas. I want him in a Raptors uniform. That's about it.
Well, JJ, this has been fun. Thank you so much for doing this. And if you guys have not checked out JJ's channel, guys, I will link it down below. Definitely go check out his channel. He posts some awesome, awesome draft content as well. I'm sure he'll be doing that as we get closer to the draft.
Oh,
So
I am
definitely.
so excited. I am so excited for the draft stuff.
So definitely go check him out. He's got some awesome Raptors content as well. And that will be it for today's video, guys. So thank you so much for watching and hope you guys have yourselves a great day.